My name's Jill Flessing, and I serve as the chair of the Addiction Counselor Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask that members of the advisory committee respond to roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Jacqueline Lightcap.
Here.
Christina Boyd.
Here.
Lisa Carter.
Here.
Jason Hess.
Here.
Chad Jacobs.
Here.
Michael James.
Here.
Charity Cosson.
Here.
Dulcinea Rakestraw. And okay, I thought I saw your name. And Zenova Williams.
Here.
I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Jill. This is Dave Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or to answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. 15 minutes has been approved for public comment from James Childers to discuss possible creation of a student temporary license for master's addiction counseling students. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On April 23rd, 2024, we sent notice to the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on our website as well and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And we have one individual sitting in on the meeting on the conference call line. If I hear other individuals beep in, I will go ahead and let you know.
And this meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda. And the first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda, which was included in your packet. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Jason, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second, Dulcinea.
Okay, motion has and seconded. Everyone in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. The agenda has been approved and we can move forward. The next item on the agenda is public comment. David, did you want to give a little bit of a background?
Sure, and this might help frame the discussion for public comment.
Okay.
So basically about 2 years ago, the Advisory Committee for Addiction Counseling was approached with a proposal to create sort of a student level temporary license. And at the time, there were two different models that were proposed that the Advisory Committee received some information on and kind of worked through some of the logistics. One was for individuals that were pursuing a license as a licensed addiction counselor at the bachelor level. Another was for individuals pursuing a master's level. And so there were two separate tracks. Those were both provided to the board for consideration, and the board recommended moving forward with statutory language to implement a student temporary license for the LAC level, but not for the master's level. And that language concerning the student temporary licensed addiction counselor language was put into a bill before the legislature last year in 2023. That was Senate Bill 131, which was originally requested by the BSRB and included many different items the board had requested the legislature consider to address items like workforce and other items as well. Since that time, the bill did pass. Most of the items that were originally included in the bill did become law. And so that LAC level student temporary license that went into law. Since that point, I think it's fair to say, and Leslie Allen, the assistant director and licensing manager, could maybe add a little bit more on what she has seen with this too. But we have seen that as a very popular option by individuals that are working towards pursuing an LAC license. The general high-level summary of individuals who could qualify for that level would include that you would have about 60 hours of coursework in addiction counseling or a related field. You would have an agreement with your school that you would be able to essentially work while completing the remaining hours towards receiving a degree in that area. You would also need to have an agreement with a certain type of facility that would agree to employ you and provide clinical level supervision while you were completing the rest of your hours. It was a 2-year student temporary license. It could be renewed for an additional term of 2 years if you were still working towards the degree at the end of the 2 years. And as I mentioned, it's been very popular. We've had a number of people apply for it. A number of people have received that. And some have even transitioned from that student level to a full permanent licensed addiction counselor after they completed their degree and met the other requirements for licensure. So I just wanted to frame that as sort of the starting point a couple of years ago. And Leslie Allen, do you want to add anything else concerning the existing student temporary LAC?
No, I think you covered it well. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
And in your packet of material, our guest speaker today, James Childers, he did include some information here about a student temporary license as another proposal. And so I want to make sure that you did see that document. I just sent it to you about an hour ago. It's also been posted on the website, so individuals from the public can review it as well. But just kind of thought that might be helpful to frame the conversation for public comment before turning it over to Mr. Childers.
Thank you, David. Okay, Mr. Childers?
So I've been in Kansas for about 3 years. I came from Missouri and I also practiced in Oklahoma. And so when I got to Kansas, it's a little different. But the origin of this really starts with kind of what I've seen in the other states and the workforce shortage here. So in Kansas and Oklahoma, and Kansas has gone to this where if you're working for a mental health center, that you're no longer required to have that addictions counseling, which I feel is beneficial, but I feel like there's a piece that gets lost with that because there's people who potentially could be practicing in those states who don't have the background in addictions counseling. And so also kind of where I'm located, so I'm in Pittsburgh, so we're right up against Oklahoma and Missouri, and the wage differential is pretty significant. So there's a couple things that I've outlined in the ask, but part of it is if I can get students, or if, as a state, we can get students engaged after they've received the bachelor, and we've already approved as a state the associate level degree, while they're working towards that. And so we're asking that we create a temporary license for people who have a higher level of education when asking for that temporary license and who are actively enrolled in a program that they're going to be able to practice once they graduate. The educational pieces are there and would play out the same as the addiction or the bachelor's level temporary thing would, that they're going to be able to practice once they graduate. But to put some parameters around that so that we can get people who gain that experience, part of the ask or I guess the statement is whether people want to acknowledge or not, they're going to work with addictions in their career. And there's a huge amount of co-occurring. And so if we can take this opportunity to bring people into the workforce to educate them, I think that if they choose not to stay in addictions and go into mental health, I think we have better rounded clinicians. But I also don't believe in siloing. because I think that too many cooks in the kitchens creates problems for the clients. And if we're able to consolidate some of that down into a single clinician, that we take a little bit of the burden off the workload. B, it's less of a strain on the client to make that adjustments to their schedule to see multiple providers. There may be different treatment approaches, and so that can be confusing. So being able to narrow that down by educating and equipping these professionals that entering the field to do that. The second part is if we get people into workplaces and they can start to acclimate to a career, I think they're more likely to stay with the place that they start. And so if Kansas allows that, which Missouri doesn't, and Oklahoma doesn't allow that same thing, we may be able to retain some of the workforce rather than losing them across state lines. And I will tell you, like where I'm at, that's an issue. So hopefully we can create an environment where they feel comfortable. We can lessen some of the burden on them. We can educate the mental health professionals, whether they stay with us or not. What am I missing, Deb?
I think you covered it.
Yeah, I think whether we do this or not, I think the end of the day, if we don't, the people who are going to pay for it are the clients. If we do this, I think we're doing something that short-term and long-term will be beneficial for the people that we serve.
Do committee members have questions for Mr. Childers or comments?
I have a quick question. So with the idea of this being temporary licensed, if they're in a master's program, then what would you envision would happen? Like, would they go, once they've completed their master's, and how would they transition then to like an LMAC? Would they go through that same process of application, or how would that transition be then once to move from the temporary status to license?
So I think the process would be the same as a mental health professional that wanted to get licensed as a LMIC. Because that process is already in place, is that correct? So at the point that they become clinic or licensed at the master's level, then I think that the footwork is already there, or been done.
Changing or not being able to diagnose.
Yeah, so sorry, Deb brought up the point when we asked before, one of the things that we had asked is that the clinicians be able to diagnose SUD disorders after they had completed a diagnostics class. And that may have been one of the hitches in getting it moved through. And so in this ask, we removed that. Changed it where they can't diagnose, which really then starts to put it in line of asking the board to approve what we're allowing associates level people to do now with a bachelor's level.
I had a question about, excuse me, some of our, in terms of Kansas and some of I guess, the states that touch us and things. You said there were some differences between Oklahoma and Missouri, and I kind of missed some of those things. I know you said something about maybe wages and something else that might be similar or different. And could you explain that a little bit?
So, yeah, in Missouri and Oklahoma, you don't have to be licensed as an SUD counselor if you're a mental health professional. And so the board transitioned, or not the board, but the KDADs sent out a memo indicating that they were allowing people with mental health credentials to practice SUD if they were working for a CMHC.
Or any provider.
Is it any provider?
Yeah, it's not just CMHC.
So at that point, I feel like if we have people that can work as mental health providers, then potentially if we offer them the ability to make better money while they're in their master's program, that we equip them with the skill sets that they need to be able to do that effectively.
So another thing that I would mention that's changed since the last time we talked about this is that for master's programs, so that I work with, so with KU, School of Social Welfare, one of the things that's changed, that was a significant change, is the allowing individuals to be employed as part of their practicum. That's a huge shift because previously there was policies in place that kind of you had to work for an agency for so long before you could even do a practicum, and then you couldn't be hired and all these things. That has been changed. And so that I think also supports what you're saying about allowing folks to be with for license to be in a practicum
Oh.
that
What-
they're already being required to do. And I think I froze up.
This is Jason, and sometimes my brain doesn't keep up with everything, James, as you know a little bit about, but because you've known me for a little bit. But what is preventing these individuals from becoming, is it just coursework from just being licensed as an LAC? Because it almost feels like we're moving down a path that we're doing an equivalent of an LAC because of the whole diagnostic piece. And I'm all for bringing more people in the workforce along these lines. I just think it's a question that we need to get clear on.
So I think there's a lot of people who enter the mental health field with the idea that they're going to do mental health and they're not going to work in addiction. And as they get further down the line, they start to realize the comorbidity.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the university at Pittsburgh has dropped their addictions program because there wasn't enough enrollment. And honestly, if I'm going for a bachelor's degree, I think that what I'm seeing in my area is most people say if I'm going to dump, let's say 40 grand on an education versus 60 on an education, that I can make the payback is like 3 or 4 years. Most of the people are not looking at the addictions route. They're looking at, I'm going to go ahead and do the mental health route. And so hopefully we can rope some of those people who didn't feel like they were going to be in addictions into the field. And I will tell you guys that I'm not in recovery. I didn't anticipate going into addictions, but when I went to work, this is what was available and it fit. And I love what I do. I'm pretty passionate about it. And so had there not been the opportunity for me to do that without the extra coursework, I wouldn't be here. And so I want to open that door for the individuals who may not realize where their passion is until it's too late coursework wise. And then you're talking about how many more courses and dollars to go back and get that education or coursework to be able to do this when they're going to be able to do it anyway once they graduate with their master's.
Great, thanks. Appreciate you just walking that through.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Deb Stidham. Just to go down memory lane a little bit, this advisory committee, and I realize some folks are new since that time, did approve both of these levels, and that went to the full board, and the full board accepted the bachelor's level and denied the master's level. So with a few tweaks, and I think, things change as you move on down the road, and we have the community-based licenses now that the CMHCs have, and I think we're all just continuing to look for new and innovative ways to attract people into the field and retain them in our shops once we've trained them. And this is just a revisiting of that topic again. James and others have decided to remove gee, it'd be nice if they could diagnose piece, which I know in the full board discussion, that was kind of a big deal. So anywho, I just wanted to kind of remind the journey a little bit and hoping that maybe we can talk about moving this forward. Good to see everybody.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Anyone else have any questions at this point? Okay. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Childers. Deb, it's nice to meet you. David, do we move on to the next agenda item?
Yes, we do have an item listed on the agenda further down for the advisory committee to discuss like this. So we could move on to the next item on the agenda, and then the advisory committee will have a chance to kind of discuss this topic when we get to that item under new business. But wanted to definitely thank Mr. Childers for his comments, and it was nice to see you as well as Deb Stidham as well.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is review and approval of minutes of the previous meeting, which was also included in your packet. I wonder if there is a motion to approve the previous meeting's minutes.
I move that we approve.
I'll second.
I'd second.
Okay. All those in favor of approval of the minutes from last meeting, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, minutes from the last meeting have been approved. That takes us to the executive director's report. Dave, please go forward.
Thank you, Jill. And I know we have a number of topics on our agenda today, so I'll try to keep this a little bit briefer, but there have been a number of different items that we've been working with. Let's start with some operations updates. First, there is a sort of a unique thing that has happened recently. I was reached out to by some representatives from the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services, or KDAD, and they wanted to partner with other agencies in the state, such as the BSRB and the Board of Regents, to submit an application for something called a Health Workforce Policy Academy. And we did go ahead and work on sort of submitting a request to be approved for a policy academy to work with an organization at the national level called NACB. And we submitted that and were awarded the policy academy. So what it basically will involve is we'll be able to work with some representatives at the national level to think creatively about addressing topics like workforce development. Some of these items may not be relevant specifically to every particular agency who's helping out with this, but the three of us, in terms of different agencies, will be working together in some of these discussions to learn about what other states are doing in these areas, and then can bring that back for the individual agencies or boards we work for, and also to bring ideas to the legislature in terms of some possible changes. So just wanted to make that announcement. Very excited about that. Looking forward to building more good relationships with other agencies around the state and partnering with them to address similar issues we're all kind of facing in right now. Another item I wanted to make you aware of under operations, if you have not been to the BSRB website, I would recommend that you visit the website sometime in the next month or two. We have a new website and it's at the same address, so no issue there, but it looks quite a bit different. And the agency has moved to a new platform under Granicus. There's a lot of state agencies that are moving to the Granicus platform, but two of the benefits of moving to our new website, we are trying to make our information a little more accessible to people using mobile devices. Over the years, we've been transitioning as individuals who are, mostly using desktop computers to being able to use laptops, to being able to get most of the information online on our phones. And so this functionality will be helpful for people who are accessing the website and maybe even applying for licensure at some point over their phone or renewing their license by phone. So it's gone pretty well. It's just been about a month that we've had the new website. We're still resolving a couple of little issues, but hopeful that it'll be a nice, clean way for us to get information to the public. All the same resources we had previously and functionality we've been able to preserve. It just may look a little different as you navigate to different things. But if you see any issues, please let us know. We're trying to make it as good as possible for everyone and improve our customer service to the public. Another item I want to make you aware of, the board has reached an agreement with a company called CE Broker, and we did just recently finalize the documents for a master service agreement. And so the representatives from CE Broker have been working with our current host of our licensing system to work on the implementation. Just as kind of a quick reminder, CE Broker is a private company that partners with state agencies in several different states. And the service they provide for free to the states is they will allow the licensees the option to sign up for a free account. And if you sign up for a free account, you can upload your documentation of the continuing education that you have completed. So for the BSRB, all of our licensees have to do a certain number of continuing education hours every 2 years as part of their license cycle. And then when they renew their application, 10% are pulled for audit. If you are pulled for audit, you need to provide that information to the BSRB that shows that you've completed all of your hours, that you've completed hours in specific categories. And sometimes that information is mailed back and forth to the office, but it can take some time. What CE Broker offers is a way for people to have that uploaded in advance to the website and also organized under the different categories. So if someone is pulled for audit, basically our staff would be able to just log into the portal, verify that they had all the documentation they needed within the set hours, and then they could have their audit be approved very quickly. So I think it'll be a nice benefit for our licensees. As I mentioned, it's not required. It is an optional thing, but I would encourage all licensees to sign up for it. They are trying to roll it out in a way that makes sense for the BSRB. They looked at our licensee totals. They're going to start first with the professional counseling profession to go ahead and put that in first, work out any logistical issues, and then move to another profession after that. So ultimately, they will have all 7 professions that we regulate under the CE Broker, but sometime in the next few months, probably, they will start that process, and we will send out information to our licensees. They will know when they need to make a decision, and it's not a one-time thing. So it'll be an ongoing relationship with CE Broker. If you're thinking this may sound too good to be true, the way that CE Broker does make money is they offer some higher tiers that individuals can choose to sign up for. They also can connect people to other available CEs. And so based on the individuals who choose to sign up for a higher level, that is a paid level, that is how they make their profit. But we wanted to make sure in our agreement that it was completely voluntary. And then for our licensees, these were free accounts. So there is no cost for any individuals unless you choose to go to a higher level, which would have more services for you. So, but like I said, we'll have more information when we do start to actually implement that process. Moving on to a couple other items. I'll go ahead and move to some items from the board meeting. The board recently met on Monday, May 13th. And at that meeting, one item that the board took care of, we had a number of regulations that have been going through the process to become enacted and finalized. And those regulations needed to have the board do a roll call vote to formally adopt those regulations. You may recall that some of the items for the addiction counseling profession included a change to the definition of in residence. It also included adopting language to formally recognize a national accrediting body for certain addiction counseling programs. And so that is in the new language for addiction counseling as well. We brought the language to the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations. We held the language open for 60 days for public comment. In part of that process, the legislative committee that reviewed the regulations expressed a little bit of confusion and concern over the use of the term synchronous. I mentioned the change, one of the changes was to the definition of in residence. The current definition in the regulation says that for individuals who did not receive their education from a nationally accredited program, they would have to get a certain amount of coursework in residence, which it describes as physically at the location of the school. The board had recommended language to open this up for specifically online programs so that an alternative way to meet that requirement was not to be physically at the school, but to be face-to-face by screen and synchronous video conferencing. And so basically they expressed some concern on the word synchronous, and we asked the board to consider adding some language that basically just added the term real time to clarify that that's what we meant by the term synchronous, that it really was meant to be real time or synchronous video conferencing as an alternative to the in-person requirement that's in the existing regulations. Another item that the legislative committee expressed concern about had to do with the term biopsychosocial. There was a recommendation when the individual recommendations were on coursework that one of the instances of the use of substance use had been removed and replaced with biopsychosocial, and they expressed some confusion on that term. And so we asked the board to consider adding clarifying language that the term biopsychosocial really means the biological, psychological, and social well-being of the person. And so we didn't want to make things overly complicated, just wanted to be responsive to the comments from the legislative committee. And so the board did recommend adding that additional clarifying language. It was treated as a post-hearing change. It didn't change the substantive meaning of the regulation, so we were able to implement it at the tail end. So that language is going to be published in the Kansas Register, which is a publication of the Secretary of State's office. It will be published on the 6th, and then it will be officially active 15 days after that point. So we'll be sending out some information to licensees about those new changes. But we are getting very close to the finish line in terms of making some of those really positive changes. And just kind of as a very high level note, one of the main impetus for those changes was to help additional individuals meet the requirements for licensure. There were some individuals that were having some issues with some of the technical language in the regulations, not just for addiction counseling, but other professions. And some of this was looking at modernizing some of the terms, making things more open, given the growth and development of online programs. And so these will be really helpful changes for people moving forward. So the board did vote to formally adopt those, and we're moving forward on that. Secondly, at the board meeting, the chair of the board did reappoint 2 advisory committee members to the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee, and that is Christina Boyd and Dulcinea Rakestraw. So wanted to thank those 2 individuals for continuing to serve on the advisory committee. Just as a reminder, advisory committee terms are 2 years. They are staggered, so not everyone comes up at the same time, but we've been doing our best to reach out to individuals when they're coming upon the end of a term and it goes by state fiscal year, and to see if those individuals wish to be reappointed. And if they do, we take those to the chair of the board, who has the authority to appoint and reappoint members. And then ultimately they have to be appointed or reappointed at a board meeting. And so their terms will officially start on July 1st, but I want to thank Christina and Dulcinea for continuing to serve on the advisory committee. A couple other items from the board meeting. The board did discuss some of the terms in the advisory committee policy for who can serve as a member of the advisory committee. There was some discussion about, right now it says individuals that serve on the advisory committee serve 2-year terms, and you can be reappointed for 4 terms for a maximum length of service of 8 years. And the advisory committee noted that there may be some individuals who would be interested in continuing to serve past that point, but also valuing having new members come onto the advisory committees and share fresh ideas and how that should be balanced. And so ultimately what the board decided to do was to say if someone has served 4 terms on an advisory committee, they would need to have at least a 2-year gap in service. And then if they wanted to serve on that advisory committee again in the future, then they could do so and serve essentially up to 4 additional terms. And then, so essentially a maximum length of service of 16 years. But after the first 4 terms, there would have to be at least a gap in service of 2 years. So there was also discussion about the board's appointee to the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. And the board went ahead and reappointed Jason Hess to continue to serve as the board's appointee to that organization, that entity. So Jason, wanted to thank you for your service in terms of that, and look forward to receiving updates from you for the next couple of years as you continue to serve in that role. Another big item the board has been weighing recently. Last year, there was a bill the legislature passed to go about trying to create a unified licensing portal, or a license verification portal, so that if someone was coming to the state of Kansas to see if someone was licensed in a professional capacity, they could come to one website and then search to see if they were licensed by the BSRB or the Board of Healing Arts or other organizations. And as part of that process, the board issued a contract to a company called Acela to start to work on a state enterprise licensing system. And they were trying to let individuals know, individual agencies know that they were able to sign up to have their licensing system under Acela. And about 5 or 6 initially decided that would make sense for them. Since that point, they have let other agencies know that the legislature has approved some funding for operations for that licensing system. So the initial cost to move under that system was going to be about $200,000 or so, and then ongoing cost about $30,000. Once the legislature had basically decided to fund this for agencies that would move over to that, it was very enticing, and this new system will provide certain things that we cannot provide currently. For example, under a new system, we would be able to have online applications for licensure. And while we can do online renewals, we have not been able to move to online licensure yet. So that is something that was interesting and enticing about the new move to Acela. And as I mentioned, the payment right now, we currently pay about $72,000 per year for our licensing system. So with this new system, the state would be paying for the cost. That would be a savings in terms of our budget and also to our licensees. So the board did review that the last meeting. They had further discussion in this meeting, and the board decided they would like to move under the Acela platform as well. So based on the number of agencies that are already on track to move over to Acela, I wouldn't expect us to be fully moved over for probably the next 2 years. In the meanwhile, we'll be making preparations to get all of our information categorized and working with Acela to start that process. But that is something exciting for the next couple of years. And then ultimately, we will have some probably more integrated processes. Right now, we have some good solutions on our website, but they may not all be connected as they could be. With this, I think we'll have some ways to streamline some of those current things that we have staff members working on in different areas. We can bring them all together. So excited about that for the future. Additionally, the board was looking at speeding up some of the time frame for certain licensure decisions. There are certain individuals that apply for licensure who are either military members or military spouses who may apply through reciprocity. And in some of those cases, there is a short time frame that we have been asked to make those decisions, or the board has been asked to make those decisions on licensure. And so essentially, if there are any issues that would require board review, the board passed a delegation motion at the meeting that would allow a hearing or a panel of board members to meet as opposed to the entire board for the consideration of those issues. So it will only involve a handful of cases, most likely, but it will allow us to meet the timeframes the legislature has been asking us to meet in terms of those military members and military spouses. So that should be something helpful for us as a tool moving forward. And then just wanted to touch upon one more thing. At the last meeting, we discussed a possible jurisprudence examination and alternatives to that. Most of the advisory committees were able to have that discussion at the last meeting, and most of them were in favor of moving forward on a proposal where we would essentially not make that a requirement, not have that be outsourced for a fee, but instead perhaps offer something similar to a jurisprudence exam through sort of a live webinar and make it voluntary and offer continuing education credit for that. So most of the advisory committees have had a chance to discuss that. All the ones that have been supportive of that. And there's just one that needs to meet on that topic this month. And then we'll be looking at some point in the fall of trying to launch that innovative approach to jurisprudence. In terms of another item for my report, so this is not officially under old business or new business, but through some of your other meetings, we have talked about the requirements for licensure in Kansas. And we've gone through the regulation KAR 102-7-3, and that was included in your packet of material. Basically, at the last meeting, Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB, mentioned that she would do some research on what other states' license requirements are. And I have to compliment her. She has done quite a bit of research, finding information for you, and that is included in your packet as well. She has included documentation for Arkansas, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. And I just wanted to give her the opportunity to maybe share some of her comments or thoughts as she was going through that exercise. I think what would be a good thing for the committee is between now and the next meeting, if the members of the advisory committee could review that information in more detail to kind of compare what we require in Kansas compared to what the other states require. But I thought maybe it would be helpful for Leslie to share some of her comments today to kind of give you some of her thoughts initially when she was going through that. And she's also a member of our staff who historically has done a lot of the comparisons when individuals apply from other states, looking to see if they have substantially equivalent requirements, looking to see their scope of practice. So I would kind of turn it over to Leslie and give her the opportunity to share some thoughts on license requirements in other states.
Hello. So I was actually quite surprised. There's a lot more licensure now than when Kansas started licensing for addiction counseling. And you had talked about possibly allowing years of practice to substitute for a degree for reciprocity. That was kind of what started this whole thing. And it does appear that most of the states that do have licensing do require a degree. Excuse me, put that over. So the states that Nebraska appears to require coursework, if not a degree. It wasn't very clear exactly, but the degree could allow them to do less supervised practice in order to get licensed. But I think that while we may require more specific coursework than some of the other states, more hours, I think ours is 20, 30 now, that it looks like the states that have a license rather than just a certification do require degrees now. So I think we're kind of in line with other people. I do believe that perhaps the education regulation, when we go over that, there are a lot of requirements for the program that maybe we could take a look at, because it has been difficult when we have someone like in a social work program who gets their coursework in the social work program. Their program is not focused on addiction counseling, so it still would be hard for some of them to meet the requirements in the regulation. So I think that's a place that we could look at, that, or that you could look at, that would help more people. But I believe the degree is pretty in line with other people.
Thank you for doing all that research, Leslie.
Sure. Thank you.
And that's really all that I had for my report. Just kind of wanted to touch upon those and then also refer some time to Leslie, that I think in terms of items for the next advisory committee meeting, if individuals could research some of those states, then if you are aware of any other states, or if you would like us to look into any specific states we didn't cover, feel free to let us know and we'll try to gather that information too.
I did try to find information in Colorado, but their website is difficult. I apologize. They do have, I do know though, they have certified people and then licensed addiction counselors, and the addiction counselors do have to have a degree. The certified people don't, but I can't find enough information to pass it along.
Okay. So we have are we ready to move on to the old business? Okay. So we have an item of old business on the agenda, continued discussion of Kansas statute. And I think probably Dave can provide a little bit more background than I can, but it is my understanding that the language in the statute of individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling is unique to the addiction counseling statutes. And we were hoping to be able, if members of the committee could provide some more clarity of whom that refers to, because it's kind of unclear.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and share my screen here, just to kind of show what we're talking about. In your packet of material, there is a copy of KSA 65-6616. It's the Construction of Act for the Addiction Counselor Licensure Act. And should be able to share that here momentarily. But most of the different licensure acts talk about sort of exceptions to who may be able to practice. Most of it would say you would need a license to practice in certain areas, unless you fall into certain categories. And so, and I'll kind of show you what I'm specifically referencing here. Okay, you should be able to see a copy of KSA 65-6616. And it says nothing in the Addiction Counselor Licensure Act shall be construed to prevent addiction counseling practice by students or interns And then I've highlighted or individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling. To practice under qualified supervision of a professional recognized and approved by the board in an educational institution or agency, so long as they are designated by titles such as student, trainee, intern, or other titles clearly indicating training status. And one thing that we've had internal discussions at the BSRB office is this language that I've highlighted here is somewhat unique to the addiction counseling profession. It really doesn't show up under the Construction of Act statutes for the other professions. And there's really not a definition of what we're meaning when we say preparing for the practice of. So we wanted to first bring it to the advisory committee. At the last meeting, I offered to do a little bit of legislative research to go back to see if it was part of the original statute when it was enacted. I have been able to pull some of the testimony from those hearings, and I have not seen a reference to anyone making reference to that term. Unfortunately, though, the original statute is from 2010, and the publicly accessible copies of the statutes, or at least the bills, goes back to 2011. So I cannot access that original bill myself, but I've made a request to Legislative Administrative Services, and then hopefully they'll get that information back to me. But the intent in looking at some of the legislative history, there have been a few modifications to this statute over the years. There was a change in 2011, there was a change in 2016. And so my thought is that if this was not something that was part of the original statute, perhaps it was added for a specific reason. And if it was, maybe someone provided testimony specifically why this was added. But unfortunately, in looking through what I have been able to collect so far, I haven't seen a reference to that. So at this point, I suspect it was part of the original statutory language. But given what I've talked about so far, we are charged as a public protection agency to make sure that individuals are not practicing unless they have a specific authority to do so. But this is a bit unclear. And so it's hard for us as an agency to do our statutorily instructed job to protect the public if we are a little unsure about what it means preparing for the practice of addiction counseling. So there are a couple ways to handle this. One could be, requesting that it be removed from statute. And if we did this, that would require a change to the statute, which would require a bill to go in front of the legislature, and that process can take quite a bit of time. Alternatively, what we could do is we could seek to define the term practicing or preparing for the practice of addiction counseling. And so that may be something that we could seek to define maybe in the regulations. So that way we would provide clarity, and it would be a little bit more of a closed circle in terms of what it is referencing. So, but perhaps I thought it might be helpful if there were any individuals that are present today that were not at the last meeting, if you have any understanding of where this language may have originated from, that might be helpful. If not, might get your thoughts on whether this is a phrase that we could potentially try to define in the regulations, if you think that might be helpful as well.
Dave, I apologize. I just was looking for through the statutes, and marriage and family therapy does have the same language. And I believe when we first started, when the bill was first being drafted, they were using the MFT statutes. So that was probably part of the original language. Okay. I don't believe that the MFT profession has been using that language in the same fashion as it's being used currently with addiction counseling. So,
okay, well that's helpful.
Yeah, at least there's a place to start.
Yeah, when the behavior analyst statute was put into place, it was modeled unlike our existing statutes, and that has created a number of different issues. But for the addiction counseling, my understanding was that it was modeled after our other professions, which has created some helpful things. But in this case, it may create a little bit of confusion.
Right.
Okay, well that'll be something maybe for us to bring up with the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee as well, to see if maybe they could address this topic at the same time that our advisory committee here is addressing this as well. So.
when I think about Mrs. Zanova, when I think about the addictions counseling profession, I think and something that's not mentioned here, and maybe this could be what it's defining, I don't know, is like peer mentors. And so that's really unique to the addictions counseling profession, that they may have some experience in the field, but maybe will start to prepare and transition to doing addictions counseling. But I don't know. That's just my one thought in terms of like that those large groups of in the different levels of peer mentors and things like that. So
I appreciate that. That is helpful. I'll make a note about that. Well, if there's no other comments on it today, what we could do, we'll bring this up to the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee as well. And then perhaps we could, at the next meeting, we could add some thoughts as far as a possible definition that we can add for this term.
Do folks have strong thoughts about continuing it to the next meeting? Okay. Sounds like a plan.
Jill, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go ahead and log off now.
Yeah, have a good day, Lisa. Good luck with your grant application.
Thanks.
Okay, so moving on to new business, advisory committee membership. Because Jason has maximized his number of terms and is transitioning off of the advisory committee. And it is also my understanding that Jacqueline will not be a public member on the committee any longer. We sent, well, not me. There was an email sent for prospective members of the Addiction Counselors Advisory Committee. And we got 19 applications, which I thought was a lot. I don't have a whole lot of experience in this still, but that seemed like a lot of applications, which were David so graciously emailed all of them out as attachments. And that's the first item of new business, is discussing new membership on the advisory committee. And if I am remembering correctly, we could add up to 3 members.
Yeah.
To the committee.
And if you'd like, I can go ahead and kind of frame the discussion on how this process can operate.
Absolutely.
And just for comparison, I did look to see how many individuals requested consideration of joining the advisory committee back in 2021, and there were 5. So have moving from 5 to 19 is quite a big jump, but there was a lot of interest from individuals wanting to serve on the advisory committee, which is great. But it does mean probably a longer conversation today. So, but you did receive a copy of the advisory committee policy in your packet of materials. As was mentioned, there are 2 board members that generally serve on the advisory committees. If there's a board member for that profession that serves on the board, that person is the chair of the advisory committee. And then each of the advisory committee has a public member. And Jackie Lightcap has served as a public member for the addiction counseling profession. She is not seeking reappointment for a second term, so Jackie will be coming off the advisory committee, and we want to definitely thank her for her service on the advisory
Absolutely.
committee. But we will have a new board member serving in that public member spot. And then the advisory committee policy talks about non-board members serving on the advisory committee. And concerning non-board members, it says that there will be a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 10. And so with Jason maxing out his service at the end of June, that will leave open 3 spots. It does say that there should be some staggering of terms on the advisory committee, so not everyone comes up at the same time, but you would be able to make recommendations to add as many as 3. You don't have to add any, but since there was an announcement thought out and so many people, it'd be a good idea to recommend adding some individuals to the advisory committee. Officially, the chair of the board has authority to appoint individuals to the advisory committee. So the advisory committee's authority is to make recommendations. What generally happens is the advisory committee members discuss who stood out the most to them when they were reviewing candidates. In the advisory committee policy, under the section that talks about selection, there is some language that says in reviewing the nominations, the committee should work to ensure there is diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. It says that members should provide representation of the levels of licensing for that discipline, and those members should be selected from among public and private practitioners and educators. So wanted to highlight that language for you when you review candidates. And as I mentioned, your authority as an advisory committee is to make recommendations. So ultimately, what I've seen work the best usually has been advisory committee members start talking about who stood out the most to them. And then if there is a consensus, that can be the recommendations. Alternatively, you can take a vote. If you do a vote, it has to be a public vote. And then any recommendations for new members, I would put into a letter, and I would provide that to the chair of the board. The chair of the board would have the opportunity to request additional information if she wanted to do so. But ultimately, if there's no other issues, she could appoint members to the advisory committee at the July board meeting. So new members, their first meeting would be at the August meeting. So hopefully that kind of frames the conversation. But yes, having 19 individuals apply for consideration was fantastic. And usually I don't participate a lot in terms of the discussions. I allow you as an advisory committee to have a good conversation about any individuals here. If you have technical questions, such as what type of license someone might have, or if you need help in terms of geographic location based on the materials they provided, I'm happy to help with that. But usually I kind of turn it over to the advisory committees and let you kind of reach consensus or vote on recommendations as a committee.
Okay, backing up what David said, I wonder if we can open the floor to comment of what applicants stood out to folks.
And just a quick question, David, you had said consideration for looking at people from paying attention to different aspects is what, and I didn't hear, is location, like as far as in the state, that matters too, right? I mean, is that part of our consideration too, to try to have a kind of a wide variety?
Yes, one of the factors when they talk about selection, they said the committee should work to ensure there is diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic setting. And so
Okay.
in the past, that graphic setting has kind of been looked at as trying to see if there's representation around the state or, something like that.
Okay. I thought I heard that. I just want to clarify. So thank you. I will also just say I was able to look at some of them, but I guess being transparent, wasn't able to look through all of them because there were so many. I don't know if there's a way to allow for maybe a little more review, or I don't know. Maybe others looked at all of them.
I didn't look at all of them, but I do know, well, I don't know him personally, but Jason Griever stuck out to me. He's been a colleague of mine, and he is pretty diverse in his he not only is addictions counseling background, but he's also a licensed social worker and also has some experience in the education field. And so I definitely, if I get a name in the ring, I would definitely put his in there. I think that he'd be a good addition to the advisory committee.
Jason was also one of the ones that stuck out to me for those reasons. Had considerable experience and experience in education. I don't know him. Other thoughts?
And I think I'll just go ahead and add this too. I try to mention this for the different advisory committees when they're considering applicants. Normally we ask board members and advisory committee members to be very conscious of conflict of interest and different things like that. In this process, it's not unusual for you to recognize a name or know someone who may have applied. Possibly you recommended someone apply for consideration. And based on the different groups that meet, it's possible that you're going to know some of the individuals who apply. And so generally that's not something that, members of the committee really need to kind of recuse themselves if they know somebody, but it's up to you. If anytime someone wants to recuse themselves, they're welcome to do so. But it is something that frequently kind of comes up where maybe everybody is aware and knows someone who applied. That doesn't mean you definitely need to disqualify yourself. It's just kind of if you think you can make a fair decision, and sometimes knowing particular attributes or history or education experience, that can make a helpful, informed decision. So just thought I would add that's a little unique in this process compared to some of the other items you discussed.
So I actually have a quick question about that, David. I guess it was in my mind. I was going to think about it, but she brought it up. So if I do know individuals, but also I am doing like contract work for agencies they work for through the opioid response network. It's like a whole system of things. I guess that would be questionable to me. I think I could be fair, but I also understand that could be a conflict because I'm gaining financially from their agency, not necessarily them, but I guess I want to err on the side of safety here. Or ethically, I want to be very transparent, I guess.
Okay.
So in that case, I might, I guess, need to recuse myself, I'm thinking.
Okay, and that's always an option. It's just kind of each individual to weigh things themselves. So, yeah.
So that would be recusing myself from the vote. Would it be okay to still talk about the person, or I don't know?
You could do it either way. What I've seen happen in a lot of these situations where people are talking about recommendations for members is individuals start sharing, who stood out the most to them when they were reviewing candidates. And then if there is just a natural consensus, sometimes there's not even a vote. Other times, if there is a vote, potentially someone could say, I'm just based on this interaction or whatever, I'm going to recuse myself from the vote on this person. But it's just kind of up to you. Everyone can handle this thing a little bit differently.
Okay. So that being said, I guess I do know Jason, and he has been very much an advocate in the Wichita area for equitable services, is very involved, I think, in the treatment atmosphere, I could say. And so those would be things that I would say based on my experience.
Yeah.
I would second everything people said about Jason. I've never really had any complaints about any of my interactions with him. I've worked with him off and on for several years now, as he's moved up through his organization. He's always very thoughtful. So his name does rise to that level for me. I know some of the other members or the other folks that are on here, and I don't know how many this group's looking to bring on. And as I go out, this is my opinion isn't necessarily terribly valid. I just took a quick poll. There's not a lot of folks from out west out here, unless you go to Colorado. I would not recommend having Colorado residents on the board or on the advisory committee. It's just my personal opinion. So all of these are either Wichita area, up in the eastern part of the state. And it'd sure be nice to have some additional representation from our more rural and frontier areas. Maybe that's something that can be pushed for the community member involvement. But I don't know. So just 2 cents.
Yeah. Jason, you brought up the piece. I saw there were 2 from Colorado and one that appears licensed and probably practicing virtually. But the other one doesn't look to have just licensed here, obviously, right on the border in Colorado. So I'm sure they see, some interaction with Kansas, but I was just curious that those were there. So.
Yeah, and just comment on that. There is some language that is in the advisory committee policy that says the same policies that apply to the board should also apply to the advisory committees, but that language has never really been flushed out. And we have had a conversation in the past as far as, we have a number of out-of-state licensees, and if someone is licensed in Kansas, but they live in another state, would they be excluded from being on the advisory committee? and nothing specifically says that's the case. So it's a factor you can weigh when considering people, but it wouldn't automatically exclude someone if they were currently living out of state.
Does it indicate anything about practicing?
Um,
If they're not the community member component, because I mean I work in Kansas, but I don't necessarily live in Kansas. So my license is in use here. So I don't know. It was just a thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If it's not clear, then right, we can take a look at them, right?
I wondered about that too.
For me, I think I'm kind of in a similar situation as Christina, kind of not. But as a professor, some of these people are my students or former students, as well as people who we have relationships with for their practicum site placement. So I have a lot of people that I know on there, and also I wasn't able to review every single person's as well. So it would be great to have a little more time because 20 was a lot, and I do teach class this summer too, so a lot. So I can think about like recommending certain names that we work with that are great, just in general, like Yvonne Bailey Banks, Nicholas Gitto, Jason Griever, who else? Amy Meisenberg, Diane Siebel. Yeah, and those are names that stick out to me as people that I've worked with. But I don't necessarily have they're all great for me. So
I also saw Amy was from Salina. I had noticed that. Again, trying to look at geographically. I know that's not Western Kansas, right? It's central, but still that just and
Salina or Abilene. I thought
well,
there was
Abilene.
some
I'm sorry,
Abilene.
Abilene. It is Abilene. I'm sorry.
But
It
yes,
is Abilene.
yeah, those were
Yeah.
as far west as I saw also.
Yeah. And it also looked like Amy had some experience being like with the city commissioner. Was a nurse. I don't know Amy at all, but I guess that was one that did stand out to me, probably because geographically and then just the diversity of background. I thought was might be kind of helpful to have that perspective.
There
I
has been
wonder, I wonder if this is something we could we could give folks more time to review all of the, because multiple applications, and then table the agenda item until the next meeting.
Yes. So the practical effect of that would be generally the terms go on state fiscal year. So if you didn't recommend people today, then if you sort of held that process until the next meeting, then it would just mean that if you reach recommendations at the next meeting, they could be brought to the board at the following meeting after that. And so there wouldn't really be any harm. You already have 7 members of the advisory committee, so you're not in danger of being below the minimum of 3. So that would be something that you could do, give people more opportunity. There were quite a few applicants, so that would be very understandable.
Is that something we would need to take a vote on?
You could vote, or if there's consensus, we could just go ahead and table that and then pick it up at the next meeting.
Is anyone opposed to continuing this item to the next meeting, which I believe is in September?
Yes, so your committee meets quarterly, so it would be in September. I guess the only comment I would say that may be helpful, as I mentioned, Jackie Lightcap is going to be coming off the advisory committee, so this will be her last Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee meeting. So any comments that she might have, this would be her opportunity to share those. And the same for Jason Hess, since this will be his last advisory committee meeting, might be helpful if either of you had comments, you may want to share those today, given the nature of your terms.
I would defer to you all on that. You're going to know, I do not know anybody on this list. I would just honestly be looking at their demographic info and their resumes. So I trust your input on that.
I probably know a little over half of the people on this list, but again, I would defer. This group of people knows knows what good membership looks like. Just do the opposite of what you've seen in me for the last 8 years, and you're going to be just fine. So,
We're gonna miss you, Jason.
I actually am going to miss this group. It's been a fun ride being on this committee. It was one of those things you just do it and see what happens, and it's been fun doing some of this work.
Crazy how fast 8 years goes by. It doesn't seem possible.
That's no lie, because I've got two adult children now, so 8 years is just a flash in the pan.
Okay. If there isn't any opposition to tabling this and moving it to the next meeting, so everyone has more time, except for Jason and Jackie, to review the applications, and we can have continued discussion at that time. I think that sounds like a good idea. Is everyone in agreement? Okay, sounds like everyone is in agreement to discuss this again in September. Okay. Next item on the agenda is discussion of a questionnaire for addiction counseling licensees. Because I'm also a clinical social worker, know that a survey or a questionnaire went out to social workers in Kansas, and I believe that David had asked me to ask members of the advisory committee if we wanted to do something similar for addiction counselors in Kansas to get a sense of how people are practicing and various items related to their employment and practice.
How is that being used? I mean, what would be the purpose of that? What would we use that for?
So for the social work survey, they've done I think 3 now that I'm aware of. There was one in 2015 or so, one in 2021, and then one just recently in 2024. Some of the questions were targeted on the movement from in-person supervision to telesupervision to see, anecdotally, seems like a lot of people have been happy with that transition, but we wanted to explore if there were any issues with that. And so we let people provide feedback, both in terms of individuals receiving supervision, but also individuals providing the supervision. For their advisory committee, we looked at what we currently require in terms of number of continuing education hours every 2-year term and compared that to what other states require, and saw that for social work, Kansas was on sort of the higher requirement list. And so the advisory committee was considering lowering that from, I think, 40 hours every 2 years to 30 hours every 2 years. And one of the questions asked, if we did lower that from 40 to 30, do you think that would cause harm to the profession or endanger the professionalism? So I think that was one of the questions that was asked on there. There were also some questions on their license examination. There have been some questions about the social work license examination and whether that should remain a requirement for licensure. And so we got some comments and feedback back from their licensees in terms of the value of having a license examination as part of the requirements for licensure. We also had some questions about interest in a multi-state compact. There was a bill before the legislature this year that was enacted that when it's all implemented, would allow individuals to get a multi-state license in the state where they reside, their home state. And it would be essentially a way to not have to get a license in every state that you wish to practice, as long as those are all compact member states. So we were wanting to know, for our licensees, would you be interested in moving to a multi-state license? And if a lot of them were, that would give us kind of an idea of what price point we could put that multi-state license at whenever the compact is implemented, and a way for us to balance the loss of out-of-state revenue from people who currently live out of state but get a license in Kansas. So that was helpful for us. Supervision has been a topic recently as well. Some of the other professions they have board approved supervisors, but for professional counseling, they have over 1,000 clinical practitioners, but only about 250 board approved supervisors. And one of the questions was, okay, well, if you're a clinical practitioner, but you haven't become a board approved supervisor, why are you not seeking to become a clinical or a board approved supervisor? And so some of the questions were kind of geared to that. There's also we asked them demographic questions too, to make sure we have a good sampling of people who provide input back on the examination. Some of that has to do with level of license, how long people have been practicing in the field. And then for professional counselors, we also sort of had a catch-all that said, do you have any other comments or feedback you think would be helpful for the members of the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee to receive when evaluating possible changes to the statutes and regulations for the profession? So there's a question, I think, earlier where we asked, based on what you have experienced or things you have observed, have you seen any issues where you thought practitioners needed more training or continuing education? And so thought this might be a nice, helpful way for us to identify problems. And then once we have input on problems that people are seeing out in the field, the advisory committees can maybe start to work on some targeted solutions. So those are kind of just a couple of examples. The only profession that has done it so far is social work. But this year I made the decision to go ahead and get a tool that allowed us to not just do one for social work, but to be able to offer that same survey option to all the different professions. So each of the advisory committees is having a discussion if they want to have a separate survey for their profession or if not.
Thank you for that. So it sounds like we could tailor that to ask whatever questions that the committee felt was important, like to help guide our future work.
Yeah, and I think I would look at limiting it to about 10 substantive questions. The social work one had about 14 in total, but there were about 4 demographic questions, such as what is your highest level of licensure? Do you predominantly practice in an urban, rural, or frontier area? In what counties do you practice? And then there's usually one more that we would ask. So once we ask the demographic questions, that assures that we have a good sampling of people who responded to the survey. Then you can get into the different areas you want to sort of target and look for any issues or other feedback. So.
Did members of the Social Work Advisory Committee write the questions?
So the way we did it with them is we brainstormed topics, and then I did a draft of the questions and brought it back. And then they kind of tweaked those questions and added additional ones or removed ones. And then once they had a chance to review that, then we went ahead and put it together officially through the Survey Monkey tool. And then that way we could kind of, it was a pretty good targeted approach too. We were able to send it out just to licensees. And so that way we could guarantee that it wasn't, put on a random message board and who knows who responded to it. We could verify that it actually was social workers responding to it. And then we also had a way to see who had not responded to it yet. And so we could send out a couple of reminders as we got closer to the end of the time period. So if any individuals had already responded, they were kind of set aside. And if individuals had not responded yet, we could just send a reminder to them that said, if you do want to complete and provide information to us, please do so by this date. So.
Okay. Is that something that folks think would be beneficial? And if so, do we want to add brainstorming topics that we'd like to address in a questionnaire for the next meeting? What are people's thoughts?
I think it'd be helpful. I think it's always helpful to ask people that are doing the work, what we need to be focused on. And I would vote for putting that on the agenda to have some time to brainstorm and to come up with some suggested maybe areas, and then look to send that out this, that when, and I know this was just said, when our next meeting isn't until
September.
September, okay.
I agree. I think it could be useful. David, I'm curious, response rate for social workers?
So when we did the survey 3 years ago, we heard back from a little over 1,000 social workers.
Okay.
When we did the survey this year, we had kind of learned a few options to make it a little bit more effective in terms of following up with people. So we sent it out to 8,288 social workers. And by the end of it, we had responses from over 2,700. So, and it was completely optional, but, maybe about 33% or so.
Okay. So
Which is pretty,
sufficient response rate to give us actual information. So, okay.
yeah, I was pretty pleased with that. Getting responses from 1,000 people is helpful, but when you have, nearly, 7,500 or whatever the number was at the time, you're still having a lot of people you're not hearing from. But this way, we got almost 3 times as many responses, and that was helpful. So.
Is there a consensus about putting this on the agenda for next time to brainstorm topics, ideas, things we want to ask addiction counselors in Kansas on a potential questionnaire?
I'm in agreement. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
Agreed.
Sounds good. So on the agenda for next time. I have to admit that I was not at the last board meeting. I had a sudden health emergency. So the next 2 items on the agenda, I'm going to have to defer to David because I think they were things that were discussed at the board meeting and I was not present.
Sure. And these items were just briefly discussed. So the topic of artificial intelligence is gaining momentum, especially as it is being used by providers. The 2 main areas of focus that I have heard so far is when providers are using it as a tool and trying to make sure that confidentiality is protected and that there are proper clearances that people are using. And so ways to regulate artificial intelligence is something that a lot of the professions are kind of starting to look at and trying to catch up. There's also been some stories in the news. There's a one on 60 Minutes that several people saw and then contacted me afterwards that we're talking about people designing applications or chat bots that are seeking to provide therapy. And so a lot of our regulations and statutes come from the perspective of a person. In fact, if you look at our requirements for licensure, this has been one of the tricky things when schools try to submit materials to us to get pre-approved, because the language in our regulations is through the lens of an applicant. It says, did the person attend a school that required XYZ, not does the school require, so it's through a different lens. And but we also are charged to protect the public by making sure that certain things are not being harmful. And artificial intelligence, people are now designing apps that will do things that a person might do, but what is our role as a regulatory body in terms of stepping in when that occurs? Or we want to make sure that we have enough expertise or guidelines that if people are using some of the artificial intelligence, we're providing at least somewhat direction in terms of what might be inappropriate. And so, as I mentioned, some of the other professions are looking at this. Some of the associations I know are starting to form task force to study artificial intelligence and how to regulate it. But it was briefly mentioned at the board meeting, thought they might defer it to the advisory committees to get some preliminary thoughts. So maybe just kind of want to frame this so that at the next advisory committee meeting, you could, between now and then, you could research a little bit about what you're seeing in the areas of artificial intelligence, and then bring back some thoughts on how you think might be helpful for the board to approach this topic.
This Jason, is there any regulatory guidance out there yet on this piece in terms of ethics and managing? Are there any other states that have actually taken it on and put some things in place? I tend to think move slow until you really figure it out, because you don't want to have to go back and rewrite and send something back to the legislature later. But this may be one of those times where you got to get something in and then you fix it later on too. So just curious.
Yeah, so there is a statement on artificial intelligence from the American Counseling Association for Professional Counseling. I think each of the associations is trying to deal with this topic, but I think people are realizing that as fast as it's developing, we're kind of behind and we're trying to play catch up. I think there's also a fair amount of conversation that could be had as far as what do we mean when we say artificial intelligence. Some people might just think that means a device that appears to be formulating human responses, but there's a lot more tools that could go under the umbrella of artificial intelligence that probably need to be covered in this too. So, but you're right. If we come out with something today and then things dramatically change just in the next year or two, how do we put something together that would be helpful for people today that will not need to be upgraded and updated every year? If we can approach it from that perspective too, that would be helpful.
Going to be a challenge. I've seen ones that can treatment plan. I've seen ones that can write notes. I've seen ones that create CBT plans. And the scary thing is I've seen them go through and look at responses from a student. And guess what? They did a good job of identifying empathy and all those kind of things in their language and their tone and everything. I was just like, dang. So
I think that's a great point, Michael. That I mean, I think there's definitely
there's a
reason
place
for
for it.
pause into consideration. And I've also heard I was listening to a medical doctor who said, is it unethical not to utilize an engine that can look at all the medical data that's out there in the world that one person could not possibly know and not utilize what's there to help with diagnosis, to help with treatment options that they may not even know of. And so, I mean, I think there's both. So we have
Absolutely.
to be very cautious of, and like you said, just because it's new and we don't understand it doesn't always mean that it couldn't be helpful. And what is the evidence? And
video conferencing therapy.
What's that?
Just therapy via this way for 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Exactly.
Our opinions have changed a tad.
Yeah.
No, I think the artificial intelligence we have to figure out something with it. And I can say that academia initially was, don't do it. And now it's like, nope, it's there. We must integrate it and figure out how we're going to utilize it. Otherwise, we're the dinosaurs fighting the folks that are moving forward and we're not.
Right. And that's kind of the approach. I think we had an individual come in. He was wonderful. I wonder if we could even get some more information on it, like if that would be helpful or possible, like to come into the committee to talk about it. But because that was helpful, this individual came in and talked about, like with students, they're going to use it. How are you going to prevent that? So like you just said, like, how can we talk about it, frame it, talk about the ethics of it, talk about how it could actually help them and move forward with that, understanding they're going to use it. And I think that's also
put it in their references. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And knowing that again, even for people that we are serving, like they're going to be using it, right? I mean, that's going to happen. So yeah, I just think there's lots of implications, but I mean, is that something where we could have maybe someone come in and I don't at all claim to be an expert. I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but I'm sure there's people that know a lot more that could talk to this group. Would that be possible?
I think people can request time for public comment to any of the advisory committees. And I don't know that I have a good source of information on artificial intelligence, especially as it might, help us from a regulatory perspective. But if one of you does, then you want to get in touch with me after the meeting, happy to kind of explore that. I think, one of the neat things about having the setup we do here in Kansas with the composite board and each of the advisory committees is that we have an opportunity to kind of explore these topics with some thoughtful and educated conversation. And then you all play a very important role in terms of looking into these in depth and researching and forwarding things to the board. So if one of you knows of someone who would be a good guest speaker to help educate the advisory committee, that would be great. Just go ahead and put me in touch with them and I'm happy to reach out to them.
The only thought I have about, because that's actually fascinating, something I never even considered. And I wasn't able to attend the last meeting either. So this is interesting, and I'll have to research more about it. But when it comes to, I guess, artificial intelligence, and like if you have like telehealth or telecommunication or teletherapy or supervising or something like that, it can be both helpful and harmful in a lot of ways, where some people may want to use maybe a AI person, in terms of to um, maybe reduce discrimination or thoughts that they might be discriminated against their weight or their race or their gender. But also those things impact and are important to who you are too and how you experience the world. So not knowing those things could also impact a person's therapy or not. But some people may feel, yeah. So it's like really interesting of like how that could be helpful, but it is out there and people are using it. Again, students are definitely using it. We're trying to figure out how to do that in academia too. But I didn't even consider that in terms of like therapy and what needs to happen there. So
I think forms of it already have been around. I remember going to a conference, they were talking like screening, brief intervention, referral treatment. They were already doing screening that triggered this. Then there was going to be a brief intervention. And then if they need that referral treatment. So that is a form of that that's been already in place, that's being utilized in the field, and being developed, was being developed. I can't even remember when that was, a long time ago. So I think, yeah, I think it's here whether we like it or not. I kind of like a lot of the technology. And so, yeah, good to think about. Just, yeah, the good and the pros and the cons, I guess, of this. And how much we can regulate. I guess that would be another question I have is like, I mean, just like anything, just like people that are coaches or providing, they don't call it counseling, they call it something else. But I mean, if somebody wants to pay for that, does it mean that we have a authority to say they can't, or do we have the long reaching ability to say you have to qualify that in this state, or like those? I guess that would be helpful too, to know where our extent to regulate that would be.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a good point because, and we were talking about the unprofessional conduct regulations. We generally are not a body that puts out best practices. Usually, our authority is to look and see, what is that threshold where if you do these things, it's going to be a violation and you need to have a disciplinary remedy. And so it may not be our role to provide best practices for the use of AI. It may be, if there is AI being used out there and it's a danger because the public could be harmed, what is our role in terms of, um, if someone creates AI or someone uses AI in an irresponsible way, making it clear that those things do fall under your professional responsibility as a practitioner or something like that. So it's a good conversation. It's definitely a good question to ask.
yeah. Because that's what I was thinking about too, in connection to those two things of if a licensed person was to create a AI that a person that a client can go into and then use, is that meaning that is that clinical services approved by that particular person? Or if a agency creates something like that, what does that mean for that particular person? Because in some sense, people can like find some of this information online if they put it in a chat GPT or whatever, an AI situation, and find a diagnosis online or find whatever kind of stuff. But is when it's done by a licensed professional, what's the responsibility for them? Or what does that mean if it's done by a licensed professional? Or is it something that we can create disciplinary action around, of like your creations or your agency's creations is consider this or not consider this, or what that might mean if that goes that way or that route? I don't know, but just thoughts.
People are already diagnosing like through TikTok, and I mean that again, that these things are happening. Yeah, it just brings up a lot of questions, I guess. And again, on the other side, is it, we want to take advantage of those. I wonder, like, even just what you're saying about diagnosis. So I'd be curious the validity if like you took 10 clinicians, gave them a case and had them come up with a diagnosis, and then you put it into AI, what would be the validity? And maybe it would be pretty darn valid. I mean, I don't know, but those
I'm
are
betting, yeah, I bet AI is better.
well, because
Or more
maybe it
more
wouldn't have the
consistent,
more consistent. That
more consistent.
I mean, I do think, right, like there's conscious, unconscious bias, all the things that we talk about
Yeah.
in diagnosis. I also think this was something that was brought up too, that like it's going to take the information that's out there, right? It's going to take the most, it like has formularies to say this is the most prevalent, so we're going to take this as true. So if there's bias or discrimination in the majority of those in posts and things that it finds, like that's going to get put in there too, which isn't necessarily a good thing, right? So, I mean, and again, these are all kind of like beyond, I feel like kind of beyond our scope of control, maybe for the board to regulate that. It's just, these are things that I think about with this.
Well, I work in medical education, right, where we're in the medical school. And kind of some of the conversations we're having with our students and residents are around using AI only in instances that it's something you could do if given enough time, right? It helps to speed up processes, right? Like coming up with differential diagnosis, right? Those are things that you could do, right? But you could plug it into AI and have it happen faster. The thing is that you have to be able to review it to say that one doesn't make sense, that one does make sense, right? And to be able to take out that extraneous stuff. I actually saw, I think it was like something with Google's AI was acting weird the other day, and somebody asked how to make something, and like it suggested using a rock because somebody like had published that in a Reddit post, 10 years ago. And since it knows all the things on the internet, right, it pulled that in. And so you would have to be able to be like, I don't think I should use a rock in my soup, right? Like that, you have to be able to then use your professional judgment and your license, which is on the line, right? In order to say that's not something that I'm going to consider, right? That's not something that I am going to use. And so I think some of that is definitely ethical practice, right? Like where that kind of falls into existing regulations, right? Where you get the information from doesn't necessarily matter, right? It's how you're implementing that with your patients. Yeah, all of that stuff out there, all of the bad, dark, ugly stuff that's on the internet is in AI too. And so it doesn't take away our biases, right? Maybe in some instances it
amplifies
magnifies
it.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to consider that as well, right? When research has come from certain areas, right, with that, then that's what it's pulling, then some of that other information isn't nearly as helpful.
I think, Dulcie, you bring up a really good point about ethics, and that, I mean, this is something I talk about all the time, is that ethics don't change. It's just how we apply it, right? And so maybe it's kind of trying to distill down what is the ethical principles that we're really talking about that we do regulate, and how does that apply in this situation, regardless of what technology, like we went through all of this at one point with, recording and dictating, and then it was electronic health records, and then it was televideo. And I mean, as these things evolve, like my code of ethics has not changed really, like how it's interpreted, and there's been guidelines to help me with that. And I think those are still continuing to come out and may need to be evolve as things evolve. I mean, it used to be the social media policy was like, don't look at Facebook at work, right? Versus now it really, there's some parameters in connecting it to boundaries and self-disclosure and those kinds of things. So I wonder, as we talk about this, because I feel like we only have 16 minutes left. We're probably not going to come to a conclusion on this, but as we talk about it, to maybe try and a couple questions there, know more about it, how it's being applied in the field, and also what's our purview as far as what we can regulate, and then what are we really talking about regulating? What is the ethical principles that aren't going to have to be updated every year? That what is the kind of the main things that if there was to be something written that the board is overseeing, what would that be? Is that making sense? I don't know. I might just be right.
And I'll mention this. we have a number of topics we're framing for a future meeting. So I think there'll be a lot of work for the advisory committee the rest of this year, but possibly one way to also continue this conversation on AI could involve the survey and a question maybe on AI. So be thinking about some of these other topics we're talking about today as maybe some possible survey questions too.
I wondered that. Cool. Okay, moving on to David and committee members, do you want to, because we do have 14 minutes left, do you want to do item D or move on to item E, which was in relation to the public comment, or do you want to put that on next, the next meeting's agenda?
Item D, I think I can talk about very quickly.
Okay.
So this was just another topic the board mentioned. We have had this topic come up a few times over the years when individuals from the public have questions about certain practitioners and the 7 professions we regulate. It's not always clear the differences between the professions. And so there has been sort of a request from us to add a little bit of clarifying information to our website in terms of defining some of the information relevant to the professions. So for, let's say someone who is trying to understand what does a professional counselor do? Or what does a master's level psychologist do? How would they understand what that practitioner would do compared to, let's say, a PhD level licensed psychologist? And so, so we have the technical definitions in the statutes and regulations, and that's not a terrible place to start. But I think there has been a request sort of for maybe add information to the frequently asked questions section of our website, just to add a little bit of fine information on each of the professions. And so we can bring back some starting language for you to look at the next meeting, but that is something that maybe the board defer to the advisory committees to start a conversation on that topic, and then maybe to offer something back to the board for the board to take a look at. So.
I like.
Go ahead, Christina.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think for a lot of reasons, especially with our interstate compacts and things that are happening in different states, and and even for consumers to understand the differences. And I like that frequent FAQs. That sounds like a good place for that. So I think it'd be good for us to talk about.
Yeah, I think it'll be good too for us, especially for addictions counselors and people understanding, because we feel those questions when they apply to our master's program, but understanding that this is not a mental health diagnosing license. And so just having to talk students through that and just making sure they understand that this is for addictions counseling, not necessarily that other kind. So.
Okay. Moving on to item E, maybe beginning a discussion on Mr. Childers' public comment presentation. I was not a member of the board or the Addiction Counselors Advisory Committee when this was originally brought to the committee. I wonder if people have thoughts on his presentation today.
Yeah, I'm strongly in favor of it, especially we have a master's in addictions counseling program. And one of those things that was really important to us, because I did bring this up too, is like wanting to be able to talk about this, because it's and similar to what he said that stood out to me was that we have students who maybe come from other states, but also students who are starting their second, third, fourth career, whatever that might be. So they may have a bachelor's in business, they may have a bachelor's in English or whatever that might be. And so when they start the master's program, they're wanting to move into addictions counseling, but they may not have had any kind of credits towards that. So they can't apply for any license. So not the LAC or any of those things. And so when it comes to the practicums, some of the places are a little bit more hesitant to place those students. And also the students are hesitant to start the practicums because they can't really get jobs and they have to do it. We have unpaid practicum internships. But if they are able to get licensed when they are a student, then especially with the CCBHC changes that are happening, if they're able to get licensed those places are able to accept them. They are able to get jobs. They're able to make that transition, and they're able to complete their hours while being employed at those particular places, and more likely to finish their degrees. And so that's what we're seeing. I would say about maybe a third to half of our students don't have a background in addictions counseling. They're coming from their own experiences, different, recovery that they're coming out of. They may have personal experience, but not the professional academic experience that would have required them. And so that does hold them off, or makes it a struggle for them to complete their practicum hours by their second year. So.
And I agree. I think two things that stand out to me. One is that practicum students are already doing these things, right? Like if they're in a master's program and they have a practicum, they're already doing these. I mean, they're already filling these roles. They're just not getting paid for it. And so that's one. Second, I think just again, there's a grassroots movement across a lot of disciplines to look at that, with practicums being more supported because it's an equity issue. Not everybody can go to work or, have that time to put into a practicum, not get paid for it. And, there's so many other disciplines that do, it's just a common thing that they get paid for that. So I know we've talked about it, and that was talked about, like Deb had said, that history there. I think understanding why that didn't get passed at the board level. I like the idea of, again, and I think of master students in other disciplines, they can't diagnose either, right? Like there's some safeguard there that someone has to be overseeing them, and they can formulate a diagnostic impression, but that person that oversees them, they're in social work, it's a field practicum instructor, has to sign off, and and those things I think are already in place, would be very that would be followed, right? Like that setup, they don't have to change anything in order to accommodate that. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I know just as at KU, we have changed our practicum policies to allow for employment, because it's so important, I think, for students to have that option if the agency is willing to pay them. And I know this is a little different because we're saying like this is for temporary licensure. I guess I still haven't. So they would pay for that temporary licensure, and then they have to pay again to get licensed at the LMAC. Is that kind of what we're thinking? Was that kind of or how would that work?
That's what I was thinking. I don't know if anyone else was chiming in, but it seems like it could follow the same as we have as a student temporary LAC. It would just be at the LMAC level. So while they are in school, that might be that they may not have to do 60 hours, or maybe it's 60 that they have to have a bachelor's, I don't know, or that they have completed, because with graduate school, that's nine is full time. So I don't know if it's like 9 hours or 18 hours in a graduate program, because whatever that might be, I don't know what we want to say in terms of like them moving in or qualifying. And then they can qualify for their students because they'll be currently in a program, a student program, to get their license, to be able to get that. And then when they graduate, they can apply for their LMAC license and then potentially move into a temporary one if they want one, or just go for an LMAC. So I think the similar process is what I was thinking.
Currently the fee to get a student temporary LAC is $50, and they don't have to pay an application fee. It's just $50. And then it lasts for 2 years, and they can renew it for additional $50. And then when they apply for their LAC or LMAC, they would have to pay the application fee and then whatever licenses they get.
Yeah. And I think, like again, that we think about from those that are going through like a social work program, they're putting in over 500 hours of practicum time, before that's a lot of experience. I also think it would draw more people into those practicums, right? I mean, in those fields, that would maybe entice individuals, if they have a choice, to pursue that. And like we've been talking, I really liked his point about preparing students for the real world, and that we definitely are looking at our curriculum, huge changes in including co-occurring, more that it's not a separate thing that you take a separate class, but that it's infused into our curriculum on a much larger scale. And even at the national level, the EPOS standards are shifting towards that too. So yeah, I'm fully, I guess, support that. Would we just need to, I mean, could we follow the same thing, kind of like at the LAC level to put it at the LMAC? Would we need to draft that language specifically, David, or is that, did they already kind of propose that?
So the only proposal that I have seen is just the document that was provided to you today. But I'd be happy to kind of continue that conversation and see if we could bring something back that would just be a set of like maybe bullets that would kind of include the different requirements, or maybe a certain number of hours given the differences between how many hours for a bachelor's degree versus a master's degree. And Leslie, did you have some thoughts on that?
I was just going to say, we do have some language, if we can find it, from when the advisory committee talked about it before. But we'll have to look back and see what we can find.
And I
That
do
would
have
be
an email with a proposal from the LAC student temporary, from Mr. Childers to the proposal for a master's level and the differences between the two. That's his proposal.
Is there a downside that we're overlooking?
I think if we're doing it for LAC, I don't know why we couldn't or wouldn't do it for LMAC. I mean, I think it's the same general idea. He mentioned something about diagnosing, but LMACs can't even diagnose without somebody signing off unless you're LCAC. So I don't really know
I was
what could be the
curious about
harm.
the board's difficulty with the diagnostic piece the first time around.
Yeah, I was too.
Leslie, do you want to share their comments or what you recall?
Well, I mean, the board didn't feel that someone who's a student should be authorized to diagnose a client even with supervision officially. An LMSW can still put their diagnosis in a file, in someone's file. And I don't believe the board felt that was appropriate for a student when there's not so much oversight from the board, or you don't know how much training they've had, etc.
Would it be different if it was signed off on by their supervisor at their agency?
I can't speak for the board, but I don't think so. I mean, because that's what happens with people who are licensed and they've done all their training and passed tests and everything, and they still have to have someone overseeing that. So that was my understanding at the time, that they just didn't feel that was appropriate.
And I know I'm not going to have a voice in this moving forward, but I wouldn't be in favor of a temporary student master's license being able to diagnose at the master's level, because quite frankly, in my opinion, they haven't earned the license yet. But being able to work as and train as being able to do it is going to give us more competent licensed masters clinicians when they do get to that place. And I am all for that. And I think that gives you more of a workforce development piece, just like it has for the LAC piece. Having people be able to start dabbling in clinical work while they're in school for their LAC, I mean, it's huge. It allows some of our peers to be doing something a little bit different that pushes them clinically and pushes them intellectually. They become more professional. I think this does the same thing, and I wouldn't see that being unable to diagnose as a hang up, because quite frankly, you're talking about working with a supervisor to say this is what I think, and the supervisor saying, yeah, this is the diagnosis, and putting it on the file anyway. So and I think this makes total sense to move forward with.
It makes sense. It'll assist completions of degrees. I know from the program that I do, getting them done in the time frame that the feds want us to do it, because they have to do part-time. They can't go full-time because they must earn income and raise their families and do all those kind of things. And being able to be a student that can earn income at the same time is extremely helpful. Not just from the clinical standpoint as we've been talking, but I think encourages people to finish.
I know we're running really short on time, but is this something that we want to like bring to the board? Is this something we want to table until the next meeting?
I'd say if we can draft the language, right? Like whatever, I mean, based on what we had last time, I don't remember talking that much about the diagnosis piece. I don't know that I would have agreed with that either. Like that seems, I don't recall that, but to me, if that's the big hang up, I'm with Jason. I don't mind taking that out, and I think it sounds great. And so if we just were able to get the language and have something drafted to recommend to the board that this be the next step.
Yeah.
Can we do that through email, or do we need to be in?
You can't do it through email if it's the full advisory committee.
Okay.
If it's a majority of members and there's back and forth communications, that's an issue with the open meetings. But you would still have the opportunity. There will be a regular board meeting at the beginning of September. And then at the end of September, there will be the board's sort of all-day offsite planning meeting. So we could try to look for your advisory committee to meet in between those two dates. That way you could kind of formulate more of a proposal. And then if you can finish it by that meeting, we could bring it to the board at the out-of-town planning meeting.
Okay. Does it sound reasonable to have language drafted by the next meeting, David, Leslie?
I think so, or at least something that would sort of be a set of bullets that would be easy to kind of explain. And so I think that would be sufficient. So
okay. That sound reasonable to everyone? Okay. I wanted to extend a special thank you to Jackie Lightcap for sitting on our advisory committee, and also a very hearty thank you to Jason Hess, who has kind of maxed out his eligibility for now on the advisory committee. Thank you very much for your service.
yes,
And
yeah.
Jason is still on, and I'm going to get this completely wrong. Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Committee member.
Yes, he'll be continuing to serve in that capacity for the next 2 fiscal years. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very kindly for saying the nice things about me.
You're welcome. The next meeting will be in September. David, would you be willing to send out a poll to see when folks are available between those 2 board meetings?
Yes, and just kind of to check, for those of you that are working in schools, is afternoon better than morning to avoid classes? Or should I just send a few different options?
Morning is better for me.
Okay.
Yeah, afternoon's better for me.
Well,
I teach on Saturdays, so
I'll send a few options. And in case we do have someone scheduled to present on AI, is it crazy that we might be able to do a 3-hour meeting at the next meeting just to make sure we cover all the ground we need to? I know we usually do 2 hours, but since the committee meets quarterly, it might be helpful to kind of cover all the items on the agenda. Unless there's a lot of opposition to that.
Or we could maybe meet in a separate time too. So maybe instead of quarterly, maybe monthly, or I don't know, whatever the other option is.
The other committees meet every other month. But with the time between now and the board's offsite planning meeting, there's probably just enough time for one meeting either way. So, but if we could possibly do a 2-hour meeting, and then if there's items that kind of would carry over, we could maybe have a special meeting to finish those up.
All right, so the next item is to adjourn the meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
a motion.
Motion to adjourn. I'll second.
All those in favor of adjournment of the meeting, say aye.
Hi.
Bye.
Bye.
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you, everyone, for your time and your thoughts and your wisdom, and have a good, cool summer.
Thank you.
You guys.
You guys.